revolutionary. I am a 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 revolutionary.
They take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
Where there's people, there is power. Justice in our time. Good evening, everyone. Today I've got an esteemed guest, Mr. Sidwell, male activist that I've met online actually through Instagram, and we've had our debates about the problems we've got in society today between men and women, and we're going to discuss misandry, misogyny today, and hopefully, show people that we can get along even when we don't always agree. Could you tell us a bit more about yourself then, Gareth?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a former teacher. I spent 8 years teaching abroad in Southeast Asia. My academic background is 5 years of psychology and 2 years of neuroscience. I work as a therapist and a coach to work mainly with men in dealing with mental health issues, usually diagnosed mental health issues, so depression, anxiety, and things like that. But I think the thing that we need to look at, or what I'm trying to do, is create a more open space for men to either learn how to express their emotions, or just a place where they can come and let some steam off and be able to kind of like function day to day with not having to like feel that they've got to keep it all inside as they try and go about things. Because as we've talked about before, we know that there's a lot of pressure on men to remain stoic in these situations. So it's about kind of like giving them the opportunity to find what masculinity means to them without somebody else dictating what that should be for them.
It's true. Fun enough, when we've had our before today, when we've had our back and forth on Instagram, when we've commented a certain post, and I would say 80% of the time we agree.
Yeah, definitely.
There's big things around, the adolescence and obviously the rise of feminism.
Yeah. And
if we think we've gone too far with the trying to rebalance the injustices, the historical injustices, to be fair, against women.
Yeah.
But what I've noticed online, a lot of the female influencers today feel that men are becoming reactionary and trying to drag them back to basically the Stone Ages, the Victorian era. And I don't think that's the case. I said, obviously, you always got a minority of men that have egotistical and obviously chauvinist, misogyny, as everyone likes to say, the buzzword today.
Yeah.
Every minute toxic masculinity. So I said, do they make up that much of the normal population when it comes to civil strife? I said, I don't think so. I still think it's a very small minority of a small minority. And when I've done my own little research into things, looking at academic papers, some of the journals online, obviously the general mainstream news reports and things like that, and people that work in the sector, they said, in terms of us as a country, we're 70 million in the UK, it's not that much at all, but it seems like mainstream media shines a light on it, and then it gets blown out of proportion, and people starting to look around corners saying, oh, who's there? Who's going to attack me? And, oh, this man's a pig, and he must be an incel, which when I first heard that term, I didn't even know it. I think an American lady called me that on Twitter, but I could tell the way she said it was something insulting.
Yeah.
And then when I looked it up quickly, when I Googled it, this is a few years ago, and I said, what are you talking about? I said, how is that possible? I said, I've got 3 kids with 2 different women. So I said, that doesn't make any sense. I said, do you know what it means? And I've realized a lot of people are banding around these words and they don't know the exact definition. So I think that offends people. And then you get the back and forth in the comments, and people says, oh, you're no good. You're using, and then you get that and they think, oh, they're hateful.
It's the same thing that you kind of get when you see in the media where they go, oh, you're woke. And a lot of people don't even know what that means. They just know they can use it as like a distraction. Yeah. I don't like what you're saying, so you're woke. And all you're talking about is common human decency. And yet, like, that's so radical to them that they just don't want to deal with the empathy side of like what goes on there. But you're right, incel, up until how long? Probably about 3 years ago is when I first discovered what was happening. I found out about like a guy called Elliot Rodger, who is kind of seen as like the pin-up boy for like the black pill kind of mindset. He went on a shooting rampage. Not a nice guy. But when you look at their mentality, and I think this is like links to like something that you said earlier, is that being online, you just get shunted to this side of the right. And this is what you find when you try to have an open conversation with someone, is that they try to polarize it. They try to push you out to one of these margins.
They do.
So I see myself as a men's advocate, but ultimately I'm centrist, because I don't see that if you are adversarial against one side or the other, you're not going to get a solution. You're just going to either get the rights for one side and not the other.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And so it's not, the only way that we can do it is by somehow finding the common ground to like make peace and try and build from. And it's kind of like interesting on when you come to look at that side of things, when they try to push you to the right, it's because they find the conversation in the middle really uncomfortable. And I think that's the same for men and women, is that I think why it doesn't get talked about so much is that the vast majority of men and women are happy in like the middle of like being like statistically in the normal side. And then you have these fringes and they shout louder because the people in the middle are content and they are happy and they're living their lives.
And they're not so radical in their views and that because of the emotional pain or maybe a bad experience. And then they can't get over it. Yeah, I've noticed that as well.
It's something that you said kind of like when we were talking about coming to do this podcast. And I thought I knew about like the misandry argument, and I researched into it, and it was enlightening. Let's put it that way. There's so much stuff that's in there that, like, not that I didn't know about, I didn't understand the scale of some of these things that take place in there. And I think that's an important thing to have, because I think what's happened in this space is it's not about a battle of genders and identity. I think as women's rights have improved, it's exposed how much men have been dealt against. Like the court battles, for example. I don't think it's necessarily gender. I think as equality's kind of come up, it's exposed that men aren't getting a fair deal either. And that like that system needs to change to benefit both of them. And I feel that with these arguments, when we look at like incels and we look at like the far side of like the 4B movement, it's the equivalent of the men go their own way.
I've seen
so
that. No,
it's kind
they
of
call them femcels now. They say they're femcels. I said, right, is that a word? They said, yeah. Some of them said, yeah, femcel. I saw a lady actually confess, I'm a femcel. I was shocked. I've never heard that before until recently, a few months ago.
Yeah, I think what kind of happens in these situations is it's the adoption of similar terms so you understand what's going on. So it's like if you were a vegan and you went into like Tesco and you saw a slab of vegan meat with no description on it, the chances are you wouldn't eat it. But if they described to it in something that you understand, like it's vegan bacon, you know what bacon is, and so you can make the leap to what that is. So if they said, no, I'm 4B, you'd be like, I don't understand what you are. But if they say I'm a femcel, you're like, I get it now. I can link that to what that means over there.
Yeah. But I was shocked because he self-confessed. So it seems to be a badge of honor for the extreme feminists, the radical ones. But then if it's someone from the manosphere, the red pill, you know, affiliated with Andrew Tate, all of a sudden you're the devil incarnate.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of like, again, it's those people who shout the loudest. Because in that argument where it's polarized either side, it's either all men are like Andrew Tate and all women are like the women at the furthest side of that spectrum who hate men without a shadow of a doubt. And they exist. They definitely exist because they exist on the other side as well.
Yeah, of course.
So there's men who hate women and there's definitely women who hate men.
Hate men, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I've seen
but
it.
Then there's...
Go on, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, then in that spectrum is where you come back to normality. And I think when you look at like the women's side of it, I don't think many men know about that side of it. I only managed to find out really about some of that far side is by some of the posts I made, accused of not being a man because I put forward that we should like, you know, cooperate and try and do things together. And therefore I wasn't a man and I couldn't look after people. And this is from a woman and that type of thing. So yeah, that was my first introduction to that.
How long ago was that? Sorry to ask. How long ago was that?
So when I first started changing my personal site into like activism, so probably about 8-9 months ago, and I posted some statistics about kind of like violence against women and how men should be part of that solution because they're also part of the problem. I just advocated kind of like just a middle ground of kind of like meeting and I get regular abuse off incels and stuff like that, saying that like you're beta, you can't look after women.
Yeah, of
And a
course,
similar
you
thing,
will get that.
and a singular thing from women saying that like because you advocate for equality, you are now less of a man because you betrayed all of your manhood. And I'm
Yeah, of
just kind
course,
of
yeah,
like,
you get that. To be fair, it's because there's so many people. It's you're never gonna get it clear cut. Because I've been called in, so someone said I'm a sellout. Someone turned around and said, "Oh well, if you're talking about the middle ground, you're a simp." But
yeah,
then others says, "Oh, you're misogynist." I said, "How so?" I said, "I volunteered for Women's Aid like 7, 8 years ago for a good spell." I said, "I even campaigned with them outside the family courts in 2018 with Louise Tickle, a female journalist." So for I used to get along quite well with another lady called Rachel White. She used to do campaign with is it no, not Martin Sheen. You know the fella that used to be the vampire in Underworld. Have you ever seen that film? He
long
done
time ago.
yeah, he played the president a few years ago. He's a Welsh actor.
Yeah, Martin
British
Sheen.
actor, yeah. So he's turned around and she used to do work with him, and he helped her promote her book and everything when we used to go to like the central lobby in the Houses of Parliament. And she turned around and said, "Oh, Sean, you're always trying to talk about we're over the top and we're too radical. So you're starting to pee me off." So I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I've campaigned with you about getting journalists into family courts so we can see the real problems. Obviously, with the strictures and not jeopardizing anyone's privacy.
Yeah,
Look, we've been successful with that. And I'm just saying, when we come into the space when there's no mainstream TV cameras, where you seem reasonable and balanced, you're saying the kind of stuff like, oh, these men, they're closet misogynists. We need to get a hold of them. The men are not stepping up to defend us, so they're tacitly supporting the radicals that are doing
yeah.
the domestic abuse, perpetrators of domestic abuse, molestation, rape. So I said that yeah, even if that's the case, I said then you're gonna have to find reasonable men that will you can ally with. And she said, no, you're peeing me off with all that. Just keep
Yeah.
quiet. So I said, so you don't think you're upsetting me? You don't think you're peeing me off? And she's like, well, what do you mean? I said, look, I've been watching you. It's not over a few weeks I've come to this decision, but I realized when the camera's not on, it's like a den of vipers. You're in here tearing into men, kind of like we're all Homer Simpson, simple, only good for DIY and menial work and maybe reproduction, and that's it. I said, but what is odd is that you're married happily. I know your first husband was a monster that you write about in your book. He basically shot her and her son, and then tried to kill himself, which he did in the end. So I said, yeah, that's the diabolical situation. I said, I can totally understand. I'll be vicious against him. Of course I would. So if that was my mother's sister, I'd be vicious. But
Yeah.
the thing is, when that happens, and you get the other side of it, like the Mara Hinleys, the Lucy. Well, at the time Lucy Letby went around, but so like the Mara Hinleys, and say some of the politicians and female activists that says, oh, men should be neutered and only let out to work and things like that. What was that baroness that said in Parliament that we should have a curfew a few years ago and everyone was in uproar? I forget her name. That's terrible. But I said if he had things like that now, if there was the male equivalent, you'd be tearing into them.
Yeah.
I said, where do you get the balance? So I stopped volunteering for them after that Women's Aid, and then I realized there's a lot of propaganda around the figures with people dying and 2 women a week dying, and that. I said that's not true. I've looked into that, and it says you dare say that publicly, you keep your mouth shut. That was what was going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, like there's that kind of issue. The way that I see it is, it's a bit like the Black Lives Matter movement,
Hmm.
and it was kind of like you would hear people then say, "Well, all lives should matter," or if you allied with transgender or with black people, it's kind of like, "Well, you don't know their experience, so you can't be part of
Yeah,
it."
you can't speak. Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
You
and
always
my
get that. You get that
argument,
everywhere. You can't.
yeah,
You can't get away
and
with it. You'll always get those criticisms once you start
yeah,
making
and,
it. You saying your own
uh,
mind.
yeah. I had one the other day. I made a comment about refugees, and it was a line from Warsan Shire's poem, and it says, "No one puts their child in the water unless the water is safer than the land." And man, I just got sledged by people over it. How can you say that as a white European man? You'll never understand it, and you can't understand it. And it's kind of like, well, I have empathy. I might never, I probably will never have to do that. And I hope I never have to make that decision about having to flee this country to go somewhere else. I hope I never have to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But my empathy allows me to imagine what it could be like, because I could imagine how horrible it would feel for me to know how horrible it must feel for somebody else having to do that.
Yeah.
I don't have to be gay. Yeah, you don't have to be gay or transgender to understand how people can be bigoted and horrible to them. And like, you know, when it comes to I don't like the term race, I prefer ethnicity. But when it comes to that, it's just kind of like, well, you can't say about it because you're not that ethnicity. And it's kind of like, again, I've got empathy. I don't know. I will never understand fully what it's like for another person to have to go through that.
Until you have the experience. Experience is always a divider.
But I can feel how upset it would make me if someone said something like, nothing comparable, like, but you know, if someone said something that I found really offensive and really upsetting, I can imagine what it's like to feel upsetting. So kind of like when it comes to this kind of thing where you say, hey, I want to ally with you and I want to solve this problem, and you get that sort of response, well, you've not been in my position, so how can you know about how to stop this incident from happening? You know what I mean? And the answer is, we do, because unfortunately a lot of men are part of this problem, and the only people that can help stop this problem is men. Women having to walk down the road with keys in their hands, or changing their routes, or having to change phone numbers or addresses just because people are harassing them. They're not doing it to themselves. It's kind of about how men see themselves. And a bit like you mentioned with the red pill, there's this bit of distortion that's kind of started to creep in there with the people like Andrew Tate, who are now affecting more people because he's being transmitted a bit more into popular mainstream. And so it is affecting how people see relationships now, in this sort of clouded view of the power dynamics that exist or should exist in a relationship, in his view. And I think that contributes then to that type of problem of, you haven't shared my lived experience, so therefore you can't comment on what's happening. And I kind of see that as kind of like a bit of a straw man, really, because you're offering to help solve that problem and be part of a solution, which we know that needs to be, and yet sometimes we're rebuffed from trying to help fix a situation that we know that not us individually, but that men as general are definitely part of.
Yeah, that's true. I agree with that. But with the Andrew Tate business, though, a lot of it I've noticed is sensationalism. And obviously, any misdeed, because he's such a public figure, any misdeed or any misstep, they say, look, see, just proof that he's an assaulter. He's a misogynist. He despises women. He just was a control freak.
Well, he is a self-confessed misogynist, though, so it kind of does add a bit of credence.
It's true. He has to self-confess, but then he's had things when he said, I despise incel culture.
I think the thing is, when he first started talking about stuff, he talks about a lot of stuff that I agree with, and that is, you know, like self-improvement, like learning control. But all of a sudden, he got to a point, and I think it's the point where he started to sell himself. You know, hey, I know that like women are like this, and if you buy my course, like I can show you how to avoid those problems. Its exact point is when.
What's it called again? Hustlers University.
Hustlers University.
Yeah. I've seen it. Yeah,
there was a guy who exposed the university thing as well. So he brought like the subscription. He showed you around, and it's just a con. And this is the whole thing about that side is you hear all these people calling me and you beaters because we want to talk about like these things. Like, you're a beta, you can't do this, and I'm an alpha. And like, if you use that logic, they're beaters, because if Andrew Tate's selling them the thing to be an alpha, that makes him the alpha. If you're buying it, that makes you a beta. And then you're not being a man, you're not finding your own way, you're just copying what someone else has done.
Funny enough, you said that. There was someone I seen from the Hustlers who said, I'd done the course for him, and he was serious. I said, look, I said, there's some, obviously at the time, this is before he got the pinnacle of his, popularity, because I saw him, I think, on Fresh and Fit during lockdown, and I said, who's this? This fella sounds odd, he's got a funny accent. So where's he from? He's like a Miami podcast.
Yeah.
And there's someone that I know that actually a few months later went on a podcast with him called Auntie Jenny. She's a Barbadian Caribbean lady, and she used to go on a couple of shows with this. You might have heard of her, Pearly Things.
Yeah.
She's been on ITV now. She's gone big. This time she's at university. You're talking about 2022. So I said, how is that possible? How did you think on there? Because I said, why weren't you on the episodes? Because I said, I fell out with her. She said some statistics that were false about black women in terms of obesity. I said, that is in America. That's not a UK based one. So I said, you got to be careful with all that. So because it was off camera though, but because I
Yeah,
said that, I could tell I was pushed on the outside. So about 8 months later, she's doing the thing with him on this. So I thought, wait a minute. How's this American girl still at university got him to come over? Then someone that I knew said there's a whole network behind her, and her father is well to do in America. So I work with a media platform, and he's quite well off in terms of material wealth. So I said, oh, that's why. So from there, I said, no, he's a bit. Even though I like the self improvement stuff, and obviously take care of your body, work hard, play hard, enjoy yourself. I said, but I said I wouldn't be coming out as no moralist. Said
yeah,
considering when I looked into him, I said he's got like a pre-runner of OnlyFans.
yeah,
So I said, you cannot be no more leader to a bunch of men who don't have his money or, physique or background in martial arts to say they
yeah,
can do what he can do. But he's giving that in a belief
yeah.
when it's a warped perspective.
Yes.
I said there's quite a few things he's got wrong
Yeah.
as well when he's quoting things. I said, which anyone with any critical thinking will know is nonsense.
Yeah.
But because he's so popular, they just buy
Yeah.
into it.
Well, it's the same kind of thing that happened with kind of like Jordan Peterson as well. Like he started off, he's a professor of psychology, and some of the stuff he started to talk about, like the 12 rules of life, is kind of like legitimate psychology, a little bit distorted to like make it a bit grandiose, but it's legitimate psychology. But then all of a sudden, he taken that step. He became popular. He takes that step into that arena, and he starts to talking about like how men should be and what men should be and what they should do and how they should do it. And it's like he said about Tate that he talked a lot of sense until he started to sell himself, and then all of a sudden he had to be this kind of like larger than life image. He had to be the biggest, the baddest, the strongest, because otherwise it's not going to sell. Like
I think he's a
if you're
narcissist.
making yeah. Well, I don't think maybe. Yeah. He definitely is one now, and it must have been there at the start as well.
It was. It was. I
He
could
is
tell
now.
from his videos before.
Yeah, his own views about things are gospel, and you hear him talk about things, and it's just like women are this and women are that and women are the other, and you can say, oh yeah, that's true, but when you question it, it's just like, well, that's stupid. Like his view of relationships, that women should be coerced and controlled, and the only way that you can get them is by having power and status and money and keeping them in check. And then the next thing he says, well, you abuse them and you turn them into cam girls and you make money off them. It's like, whoa, that's a bit of a leap from telling you how to live a kind of like functional, prosperous life to committing a crime. You know what I mean? It's like, and then when you see people in those kind of mindsets who live up to that type of thing, you can kind of see it being manifest, and you can kind of see why women might take those views that me and you kind of like find like, well, like, hold up, we're not like that.
Yeah, but what's odd is he's got obviously a sister and a mother. So I'm thinking, even when I was a teenager, and
that's always my argument as well.
I said I'd always have in mind when my friend said that thing. I said nah, because I wouldn't like that if that was my sister or my mum. So I said no, I'm not in it. Even though some people said, oh well, you're an idiot, then you're not one of us. I said yeah, well, I don't mind that. I don't mind
exactly.
That. But some people, it's like diminished responsibility. So they think, well, I want to get in the gravy train and I want to be things. So maybe I could be like them if I follow this pattern. So I think a lot of it is like the blind leading the blind and sheep.
Yeah.
Sheeple,
sheeple, yeah, absolutely.
So that's why. But because I'm from a young age, I always had that kind of internal compass. I said, nah, I don't like that, or I don't rate that, or you can't do that because if that was your mum or sister, oh, that's different though. I said, no, it's not different because they're dehumanizing people. So I said, but that's how the mindset works. I said, you know what, I'm all right, I'm out.
But there's next man, isn't it? So you wouldn't do it because of, or you are doing it, but you wouldn't do it to your mum or your sister, or you wouldn't like it. But then there's always another guy who will do exactly that to your mother and sister because it's permissed within that kind of like environment. And I have the same mindset of like, I would never do anything like that to my mum and sister. So I don't see why I would project that sort of outward thing to be that hypocritical stance of saying, no, that's wrong.
I think that's just a human quality, the hypocrisy. Yeah. I think that's just a human thing. It's hard to get away from.
Yeah, it is. But like, I try to hold myself to the ideals that I talk to people about, like with the clients that I work with. I don't tell them what they want to hear.
Yeah.
But from my experience, if like we talk about it, I'm not going to make something up that sounds better than something that I've actually done, because that honesty is what allows people to make a decision. Like if me and you are in a therapy setting, it's not my job to tell you how to live your life. Like we can talk about things that you find distressing or positive, but ultimately you have to make the decision how you live your life. And like when we look at like the incel side of things, they're not living a life, they're being told how to live a life. And if you go to like the black pill guys, and they're the ones that I feel the most sorry for, because they're just stuck in this echo chamber where they're told that they are useless, they are ugly, they're unwanted, like the genetics has gone against them and all of this, and they're just stuck in there and they're just getting angrier and angrier because that's what everyone tells them their life is worth. Your life is only worth what your genetics give you, or I don't know, if your eyes are slightly moved to one side or whatever. And actually what these guys need is just to like build their self-confidence up. Because I think as well in these environments, it's always like high status women, so that everyone should have a Margot Robbie, or you know what I mean? That,
yeah, of course, yeah, Beyonce or
or
and
so if you're in,
Jones,
so you're stuck in an environment then where like in a pyramid, it starts to narrow, doesn't it? So whereas normally there's like, how do I frame this in that kind of, but like there's lots of women, there's lots of men, and there's different ways in which you can meet up and stuff, and you know, different levels of attraction. But this focus of kind of like high status women makes the competition worse. So let's say there's a woman for every man on earth, but
more.
Yeah,
a number.
But now one of them, but now you elevate some of them to be in higher status. Then you ignore the rest of the people, and everyone now starts to compete for those. So where it's 1-to-1, it's now 10-to-1 or 100-to-1. And that's what breeds that frustration, is because in their term, everybody should have a Stacey, which is kind of like the epitome of what a woman should be.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
But when you start doing that, you, not that you put yourself out of it, but it's more of a competition. And it's probably not what you want anyway. You're just told that that's what you should go for. And I find that hard, because I think for a lot of men and boys, predominantly boys in that situation, is they're not learning what a healthy relationship is. They're just being given a tick list of what they should be doing.
I think it's just a rites of passage, though, because when I was at school, there was always that kind of thing. That's why I find it odd. When I first heard about, well, you said the black pill, but this red pill thing, I said, I remember when I was a teenager, there's a film called The Matrix with Keanu Reeves. I said, is that what they're talking about? That was supposed to liberate you, basically make you wake up and be free. But then all of a sudden, there are these negative connotations, and because Andrew Tate's popular, he's caught in the film that we all watched when we was young, and then next minute, it's a big no. You're obviously a misogynist if you believe that. So I said,
no, but that's the funny thing, that he says, I'm freeing you from the Matrix. So by that definition, Neo now is free to roam and do whatever it is he needs to do to fight that system, to change the system to be fairer back to humans, right? But he says he's freeing people from the Matrix, but he's prescribing how you live your life and what you need to do. So he's actually telling you to come into the Matrix. He's not giving you the
like Agent Smith.
He's just flick the colour of the pill, and everyone's like, I'm free of the deep state or whatever it is. And they're not. They're in that because that's the line that they get fed. If you've got critical thinking, you'd be like, that's absolute nonsense. I agree with that.
That's what I was shocked. You see how you said that? I thought anyone, I'm not saying they have to be the top education, but obviously trust, but you verify things, you go and check, cross-reference. And the way it's like, it's programmed. But I said, wait a minute, you've got better education than me. You're smarter, you being thing, but I don't know if it's a character flaw, or like you said, the desire to be desired so much, they're prepared to like mental comb over.
So what happens is that the thing about these types of things like conspiracy theories and that type of stuff is, so if something's true, you don't have to add anything to it. So if I told you that 2 and 2 equals 4, I don't have to add conditions on top of that to make it true. But we know that we need knowledge and understanding when it comes to these things. So like you say, you'll cross-reference, or you'll Google search, or you'll do something to try and get the additional information to get it to make sense. When it comes to this type of stuff and conspiracy theories, the fact that they have to add these layers to it justifies the fact that it's real. Think of like flat earthers, for example. I've never seen the earth from outside, so therefore it must be flat. And it's this thing that, like, so if you are, let's try and think of an example. So let's say we talk about anti-vaxxers.
Mm-hmm.
So they read one thing that says the vaccine caused autism in a child. Okay. Then the argument comes up of, well, we never saw autistic children before this vaccine. And then they start to go, well, so-and-so's done this, so therefore that is the answer. And then there is no change in that answer. It doesn't matter what evidence you present to people. They're like, no, that's not correct. I've got the right answer. You're trying to sell me the party line or the political term for this. And you can't change their mind. The more you try to throw evidence at them to say, hey, look, this is what we found, the more you entrench them in their position, because they're right. In their mind, they're right. And every time someone throws something at them, it just entrenches them in that mindset. And it's the same for a lot of things.
The grandeur, don't you think? To be so inflexible when you're showing evidence, tangible evidence that contradicts what you believe, and they double down and they get more determined, and obviously they start insulting you, and yes, and it's so.
But that's when you know that the argument that they put forward runs out of things. There's a thing called the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yeah, I've read about it.
So the Dunning-Kruger effect is basically the faculties that you need to know that you're good at something are the same faculties you need to have if you're bad at something. So if you're bad at something, you don't have the faculties to recognize you're bad at that thing. Donald Trump is a perfect example of this type of mentality. So in this thing, they're prepared to talk to you about that topic, but they don't know enough about it. So then they resort to the whataboutism, or this is your fault because you're a dick, or they resort to that thing as a distraction from the fact of they don't have enough evidence to back up the claims, or the claims become wild.
Because I notice a lot of them, the ego, they don't like to be discredited publicly. I usually try to talk to them kind of people like one-on-one without an audience. But I notice if you get in front of an audience, because I had a younger brother that was like that, once there's an audience there, they're like, they will fight you. With our fisticuffs over it. And it's in every level of society. When I say, maybe it's just a street, normal everyday citizen, but I've seen that even in like local politics and national politics.
I think it's been emphasized in politics, and I think that's one of the biggest problems. I looked at some of the research. I read a book by Laura Bates, I think it was, of Why Men Hate Women, and it was absolutely fascinating. And then you looked at kind of when Donald Trump ran his campaign, and all of a sudden you see kind of like the incel movement is there, and it's not nice by any stretch of the imagination. But when Donald Trump starts talking about his things and the videos come out and his comments about grabbing them and that, all of a sudden you see this spike in misogyny, celebrities being battered, normal people being just battered by abuse. And that's stable through his term. It drops off through Biden. And then as soon as he comes back into the picture again, it shoots up. And that's the same with far right wing ideologies as well, also shoot up in the same manner. And
but it's always there though. It's always there. That's the thing. It's just the opportunity to get the limelight.
Yes. So, once it's legitimized by somebody, then you can do what you want. So if he can say it, and he's the president of the United States, I can say it. And I found that quite a lot with people like after Brexit and stuff like that people just feel that they could say whatever they wanted to me or my friends who were like Asian and stuff like that.
Yeah, I know it's
just kind of like
definitely.
And it's just so once you get tacit approval to do something, it's very hard to put it back into the box. Then once people are like, well, Nigel Farage just says it, so I can say it, and it's kind of like, well, no, you can't. It's like
I know there's a lot of friendships that have been broken that have been for years. I noticed after that where they said, I can't interact with you anymore. We don't. I thought we were aligned in our values, but obviously not.
Yeah, what's the quote? Is it like it's something like we can put aside our differences as long as your differences aren't rooted in my oppression.
Yeah. It's true. It's fascinating, but I don't know what we're gonna do. I know you're doing your psychology thing, isn't it? And I do a bit of like local activism. I try to engage my local authority over it, but the solutions are very convoluted, and there's people with hidden agendas that don't mind things to go out in public with that. But then when you challenge them over, say, look, what you're doing is not quite right. Like the fact with the 2 women dying a week. I said, when I looked at the mayor's office for police and crime, Mopac, I said
Yeah.
when I looked at the paperwork, it says you've got statistics from violence against men and boys in there as a subheading, and then there's 2 people dying a week, and then in London, and then you're making it as if it's 2 women when it's 2 people. So I said, and this is said. If I never read this, I would have just believed what was pumped at me when I used to be at Women's Aid. So that's when I started to withdraw and said, you know what, we got to look at this. It's unbalanced. We're going from one extreme to another. So I said we got to find common ground, which I want to
Yeah.
catch up with you next. When next time? When are you next available?
Should be the same time next week as well if you want to.
Yeah. We got to do a part 2 on this because I want to get into it and
Yeah.
I'm sticking with the thing. So
Yeah. Okay.
but definitely we'll catch up with this.
Okay. So I guess then for like my closing kind of like part for this is that you're right. We do need to find common ground, but we need to find the right people to start to build that common ground with. We're not going to find them in the extreme margins. We need to find people that not necessarily have the similar opinion, but there is a female activist group who are fighting for fathers to have access to children. And I think it's finding those types of partnerships is what will allow us to build from the inside out to cover those things. But yes, it's going to take time, and there's going to be a lot of mistrust because there's a lot of people who go around like Justin Baldoni, who said that he was a women's activist, and then these allegations came out against him, and everyone's like, well, that's just like all men are just snakes to try and get what they want. So it's a difficult ground to tread as like somebody who wants to make that change. But I think we need to just align ourselves with other groups that are doing the same thing and try and find the common ground between those groups. So we focus on what we share in common rather than the bits that make us different. And I think that's kind of like a case for a lot of parts of our life is that we should focus on what makes us all better rather than looking at what makes
definitely. Of course. I agree. And that's us today, folks. Where there's people, there's power.
us. Yeah.
Justice
Yes, man.
in our time.